La 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 la. This is a simple step-by-step guide on how to make DIY flare pants. This is my sketch and original design. I decided to make flare pants that had gathers around the leg. And what I've done here is to get the width of fabric in which I will gather back. I multiplied the original width of that knee part of the leg by 4. And I'm going to gather that back into the trouser leg to create the illusion I want. So I initially wanted pockets, but I changed my mind and I just decided to keep it simple and straight to the point. So I have worked from the original trouser pattern which I have a previous video on that. Please check that out if you'd like to see how trouser patterns are made. And then I will cut 2 pieces for the front and 2 pieces for the back, and because I want the waist to be fitted, I have included darts, and I am going to be tracing out a facing for both the front and the back waist. So these are what the facings look like, and facings just help you finish off waistbands really neatly and nicely across. And the facing does not include the dimension of the darts. That is another video for another day, but you would need 2 facings each. That's 2 for the front and 2 for the back. So when you join them all together, they make the complete waistband that you will need. So this is the flare that is going to be gathered back into the trouser leg, and the dimensions is 100 centimeters by 45 centimeters. So when this gathers back in, there's a little bit of fullness around the knee of the trouser. I'm also going to be needing straps which measure 50 centimeters by 12, and I'm going to be needing 4 of these, 2 for each leg. As for the fabrics, I got these fabrics when I went to my last fabric haul at Walthamstow Market, and I'm using this navy blue checkered material, and it's just divine. The color and the feel is amazing, and I thought it would be cool to match up this black and white checkered material with it as well to just create fun and dimension. I also got myself interfacing and zip to complete this tutorial. The next step is to cut out all the pieces I need. So I started out by cutting out the flare because that's the biggest piece in this project, and then I went on to cut my front and back pieces, and because I wanted the front to have a different panel, I'll be cutting it in the other fabric. Don't forget your notches, guys. Notches are your friends. So I'm quickly going to cut the other fabric, which is one of the front panels for the trouser leg, and mark those notches in so it's a whole lot easier when it's time to sew. So I'm going to cut my facing in this black and white fabric because I was running out of the blue one, and because the facing is going to be inside, it wouldn't really matter anyways. So these facings are going to be reinforced with interfacing later on. These are the number of pieces I have. As you can see, the front has 2 different fabrics, but the back have 2 of the same. I've cut myself the strap, and I have the flare which goes in the bottom leg. And the other thing I've cut out here is, as you can see, I cut out black lining because it's a bit chilly this time of the year, and I just wanted to give this trouser more warmth. So I followed the same pattern and cut myself linings for the front and the back as the first step in the joining process is to sew together all the darts. So I'm going to start with the front of the trouser, and I've pinned together the darts and marked where I want it to end. So I'm just going to sew both sides of the front panel using the normal straight stitch on my domestic machine, and when you get to that edge, make sure you really taper it out so it's nice and flat when you press out the darts. So I've worked on the back of the trouser as well before going ahead to join the left side and the right side. So what this means is I'll take the front panel of one side and match it together with the back panel of that same side. So I'm just going to pin them together and join the side seams and the inner thigh seams as well, but leaving it open 6 inches above the hem. So I'm going to take this to my domestic machine and sew it together using a normal straight stitch on a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Carefully easing both seams in, I am going to work on the left and the right leg of the trouser before making the flare. To make the flare, I am going to create gathers by sewing using a loose stitch on my domestic machine. And because the stitch is loose, what it would do is when you take it out and pull the bobbing thread, you would be able to easily create gathers on one side of this piece of material. So this is one of the parts that will go on one leg of the trouser, and I've stitched up that part and I'm pulling it in now to create the gathers which would make the flare. And once I've gathered it enough, I am going to join that gathered bit to the hem of one of the trouser legs. So what you would want to do here is to pin the beginning and the end of this gathered piece and just carefully ease the gathers into the hem. So that would mean like releasing some of the gathers and just pinning it in until both panels fit together perfectly. And then you take this onto your machine and sew it on a 1 centimeter seam allowance. You can either take out the thread which you used to gather, or you can leave it in. I decided to just leave it in because I wanted the gathers to be secure. So this is what it looks like at this point, and I am going to join together the inner side seams from the top of the trouser leg into the bottom. But before I join that, I am going to fix in the straps, and the strap involves just closing one side of this folded piece of material. 2 straps are needed for one trouser leg. So once I've stitched in the marked points, I am going to turn it inside out to make the straps which I need. So sewing normally and turning it inside out, I would close off one end and then fix the other end into the trouser leg. So closing this end just means folding it inside and sewing on a 0.5 centimeter seam allowance on the machine. Using a normal straight stitch, I am just going to secure this part of the strap and close it off. So I've worked on both straps and I'm going to fix them into the seam of the trouser. So what you want to do is turn it in this direction and fix the raw edge on the raw seam. So what you have inside is the covered end of the strap. So you would want to pin the 2 straps as closely as possible enough so when they're stitched together it looks like they're both originating from the same point. So once I've pinned that across the joining point of the top of the trouser and the gathers, I'm going to pin up the rest and take it to stitch on my domestic machine. So using the normal straight stitch on a 1 centimeter seam allowance, I'm going to close up that seam, catching the straps in there as well. So as you can see, the straps are nicely secured and they cover up a bit of the gathers, so it creates the illusion that the flares came from the top of the pants and the straps are just magically part of the pants as well. So this needs a good press, and I'm going to work on the second leg of the trouser leg. So following the same process of joining the darts and the side seams and the flare, you just make the second leg of the trouser before doing anything else. So this is what it looks like at this point before proceeding to join the left side of the trouser to the right side of the trouser. So the easy way to do this is just to join both center points, that middle bit right there, and just pin it together. You pin together the 2 front panels, you pin together the 2 back panels, and what you just need to do is sew one long stitch from the front to the back. But you want to leave the back open because that is where the zip would sit. So once you stitch that all the way to where you want your zip to start, you would do a back stitch so it doesn't like pop open at any point. So I'm going to stitch this securely on my domestic machine on a 1 centimeter seam allowance, and be careful when you sew around curves because it can be a bit tricky. For the lining, I followed the same process of making the trouser, and I left the back open as well because we want the zip to fit in there too. So the next thing I'm going to do is to fix this lining into the trouser. So I've turned the trouser inside out and I'm going to tuck the lining or rather tuck the trouser into the lining. So when you wear the trouser, what you would see is it's sort of like the smooth side, and the lining covers up all of the seams that the trouser has. So once that is all done, I'm going to pin together both of their waistlines, and is to work on the facing next. To make the full facing of this trouser, you need to join together all of the parts. So you need to join together both fronts and then join that front piece to the 2 panels of the back. So I'm just pinning together all the pieces here. So once I take it to the machine, I know I'm just going to stitch them together the way I want. So as you can see, I'm going to join together the sides and the center front, leaving the back open. So I'm going to take this on to my machine and stitch it all together. So using a normal straight stitch, I am going to sew it together and take it to my overlocker to overlock the seams as well as the bottom hem of the facing, so it's like, you know, nice and secure. I'm going to pin together my facing to the waist hem or the waist seam of the trouser, and just making sure it's, you know, secure and doesn't move around. The next thing to consider is the zip and how you want it to sit. So what I'm going to do is to sandwich the zip between the facing and the back of the trouser seam. So what I'm doing here is I'm pulling the tape out in such a way that there is enough to be stitched out, and even after a stitch, when you fold this outwards, there is enough of the zip teeth to be zipped up. So this is just what it looks like, and I'm going to pin that in place. So when I am stitching, I'm just going to go ahead with one long stitch from one end all the way around the waistband to the other side of the zip. So this is what it looks like right now, and I'm going to take it onto my machine and stitch this using a normal stitch on the 1 centimeter seam allowance. So it's a bit tricky to stitch around this point because what you want to do is get the zip on the trouser back seam as well as catch the facing in there as well. So once you sort of fold that place outwards, you don't see any of the seams around the waistband of the trouser. So when you get to this point, you're going to turn and face the waist and stitch all the way across using that same continuous stitch until you get to the other side of the back seam, and then you go back again on the zip tape and sort of end it there. What you end up doing is using one stitch to do this full process. So this is what it looks like at this point, and it's a very nice way to like fix zips into waists of trousers or skirts. So once you fold this outwards, because you sandwich the zip in between the facing and the waist, you don't see any of the end of the tape, and it just looks really nice and very professional. So what you want to do is go back in there and trim off any excess tape and give it a good press. So this is what it looks like after it has been pressed, and I did a top stitch just to like secure that facing inside there. And I'm going to be using the needle and the thread to stitch down the center front of the facing to the lining of the trouser. So this just keeps the facing put and inside of the trouser. So I'm going to do that for the center front and for the 2 side seams of the trouser. So what this really helps to do is to keep that waist nice and smooth, and the facing doesn't fold outwards even when you have the trouser on. So I'm going to nicely secure this last stitch and finish this tutorial. I hope you guys enjoyed watching and you learned a thing or two. It was an experience, and what I love about sewing tutorials, it's always a learning curve for me. It gives me the chance to improve on what I already know and to inspire people with what I do. I hope you enjoyed watching, and I would love to know your thoughts and your comments down below. Until my next video, have a good morning, afternoon, and evening wherever you are. Bye.